I thought losing my husband would be the hardest thing I would ever face. The day he took his last breath, I remember feeling like the world had stopped spinning. I was numb, broken in ways I didn't even have words for. Everyone says grief feels like a weight pressing down on your chest. But to me, it felt more like the ground had been ripped out from under me, and I was falling endlessly with nothing to hold on to. The only thing that kept me from completely shattering was the house we had built together. The place where his laughter still lived in the walls, where his coffee mug still sat on the counter, where I could close my eyes and almost imagine he was still here. That house was more than bricks and paint. It was the dream we had pieced together through years of hard work. I still remember the weekends we spent fixing up the porch, my husband hammering away while I painted the railings. The two of us laughed when I spilled half a bucket of paint on the steps, and he told me it was our mark, something no one else could ever take away. Inside those walls we celebrated birthdays, holidays, and the quiet mornings when he would leave little notes on the fridge before work. That house was love. That house was safety. That house was us. And when he was gone, it became the only thing keeping me from feeling completely alone. But grief has a way of blinding you. While I was drowning in memories and trying to find my way through the darkness, I didn't notice the shadows creeping in. His family, the very people who had cried at his funeral, started to look at me differently. Their words, at first, seemed filled with concern, softly asking how I was holding up, if I needed help, if I planned to stay in the house. But underneath their voices, I could hear it, that sharp edge, that calculation. They weren't asking out of kindness. They were circling like vultures, waiting for me to weaken. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That grief was twisting everything around me. But then, days after the funeral, I found the first set of papers slipped under my front door. Legal documents filled with words I barely understood. Phrases about inheritance, ownership, signatures. My hands shook as I tried to make sense of them. They were testing me. They wanted to know if I was too broken to fight. But the papers weren't the worst part. The worst part was how quickly they moved from words to action. Soon, they stopped pretending. They came to the house unannounced, sometimes late at night, sometimes in the early morning. Their voices grew louder, their eyes colder, their demands sharper. They told me outright I didn't belong there anymore. That house, the one I had poured my heart into, wasn't mine. They wanted me gone, and they wanted me gone fast. I tried to stand my ground. I told myself this was just grief lashing out, that if I stayed strong it would pass. But each day it grew worse. I started noticing how neighbors began looking at me differently too. People who once waved across the yard avoided my eyes. Friends I thought I could count on pulled away, their silence louder than any words. It felt like the walls of my life were closing in. Not only was I grieving, I was becoming an outsider in my own home. And then came the first real scare. One night, as I sat alone in the living room, I heard slow, steady footsteps outside my window. My heart froze. I held my breath, praying it was nothing. But when I looked, I saw a shadow standing at the edge of my yard, watching. No knock, no words, just silence. They didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. I wasn't safe, even inside my own home. The next morning, I found the lock on my shed broken. Boxes were tossed across the floor, things scattered as if someone wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wanted. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just about pushing me out anymore. It was about making me afraid. Each day after that, the pressure twisted tighter. My grief turned into fear, and my fear slowly burned into anger. But even as they tried to corner me, I refused to leave. Because leaving meant surrendering. Leaving meant letting them erase the life my husband and I built together. Still, deep down, I knew something was coming. The tension was rising like a storm that hadn't yet broken. I could feel it in the air every time I walked through those rooms. Every time I heard a car slow down outside. Every time the phone rang and no one answered when I picked up. Something was building. And then, one night, it all came crashing down. That night is burned into my memory like a scar I'll never forget. I was sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp the only light in the house, when the pounding began. Not a polite knock. Not even the kind of knock someone gives when they're angry. No, this was violent. Fists slamming so hard against the door that the frame rattled. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, every part of me trembling, as the pounding grew louder and faster, echoing through the empty rooms like thunder. I didn't want to answer. I didn't want to see their faces. But before I could even make a choice, the door swung open. The lock gave way under their force, and suddenly they were inside his family. Faces twisted with anger, eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Hatred, sharp and cold. They stormed in like the house already belonged to them. Voices overlapping, words spilling out in a flood of cruelty. "Pack your things. Tonight you're leaving." My hands shook as I tried to steady myself, my voice breaking as I told them this was my home, that I wasn't going anywhere. But my words were drowned out in the chaos. They didn't come to talk. They came to take. One of them grabbed a photo from the shelf, the one of me and my husband standing in the yard, our arms wrapped around each other, the sun glowing behind us. I can still hear the sound of the frame shattering as they threw it to the ground, glass exploding into 1,000 tiny pieces across the floor. That sound cut through me like a knife. It wasn't just glass breaking. It was my life, my memories, my love, reduced to shards at my feet. Tears stung my eyes, but something inside me shifted. Up until that moment, fear had kept me small. Grief had kept me quiet. But watching them destroy that piece of us woke something I didn't know was there. My chest ached with anger. My voice rose louder than I thought possible. I shouted over them, words trembling but fierce. I told them they could scream, they could threaten, they could take every picture off the walls, but they would never erase the love that built this home. The room fell still for a moment. Their voices cut off, and all I heard was my own breathing, fast and heavy. They looked at me differently then, not like someone broken, not like someone weak, but like someone standing in their way. That silence was worse than the shouting. It was the moment I realized there was no going back. The line had been drawn. Eventually, they left, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But the damage had already been done. I stood there in the quiet, surrounded by broken glass and shattered memories, my body shaking from head to toe. I wanted to collapse, to curl up and let the world swallow me whole. But another part of the Betrayal, some part I didn't recognize, was awake now. I knew then that this wasn't over. What happened that night was just the beginning. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was war, and war changes people. The days that followed were a blur of fear and tension. Every creak in the floor, every sound outside the window made my chest tighten. I started locking every door twice, checking the windows again and again, sitting up late into the night with the lights off just to see if anyone was watching. And sometimes they were. I'd catch glimpses of figures lingering near the yard. A car parked too long at the corner. The faint feeling of eyes on me even in the dark. I tried reaching out to people I thought I could trust. Friends, neighbors. But most of them stayed quiet, nervous, unwilling to get involved. I could see it in their faces. Fear of conflict. Fear of the family's power. Fear of choosing sides. Their silence cut deeper than words ever could. It made me realize how alone I really was. But loneliness can turn into something else. It can turn into resolve. And that's what it did for me. I started keeping notes. Every threat, every visit, every shadow that passed too close to my home. I wrote it all down. Proof that this wasn't just grief twisting my mind. Proof that I wasn't imagining the cruelty aimed at me. And as I wrote, the fear slowly began to burn into anger. And the anger into a strange kind of strength. Because here's the truth. When you've already lost everything that matters, when the one person you love most is gone, what else do you really have left to lose? That's where I was. And that's why I wasn't going to give up. Still, late at night, when the silence pressed in too heavy and my thoughts wouldn't let me sleep, I couldn't help but wonder, how far would they go? Was I just waiting for another broken lock? Another midnight pounding? Or was the next step something far worse? The fear lingered with me, night after night. But so did the fire inside, and deep down I knew the storm was far from over. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it grew darker each day. I would wake up in the morning to find new scratches on the side of the house, the garden trampled, trash thrown near the porch. At first, I thought maybe it was kids, random cruelty, but in my heart, I knew better. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. Every small act was another message. You don't belong here. You're not safe. I tried to stay strong. I told myself to breathe, to keep going, to remember why I was fighting. But grief has a way of creeping back in when you're most vulnerable. Some nights I sat on the edge of the bed, clutching one of his old shirts, pressing it to my face as if the faint smell of him could shield me from everything outside those walls. It was the only thing that calmed the pounding in my chest. And yet, even in those quiet moments, the fear never truly left. Then came the letters. At first, they were slipped under the door like the legal papers had been. But these weren't official documents. These were notes, scribbled in sharp, angry handwriting. Get out while you can. This isn't your house. We won't ask again. I would find them on the doorstep in the morning, damp with dew, or tucked between the slats of the fence when I went outside. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper. I started jumping at every sound. The creak of the floorboards made me freeze. The bark of a neighbor's dog sent chills down my spine. I kept the blinds closed most of the time, living in half darkness, afraid that if I left even one window uncovered, someone would be watching. Maybe they already were. But what broke me most wasn't the threats. It was the betrayal. These were the people who had sat beside me at the funeral, who had hugged me while I sobbed, who had sworn we would get through the loss together. And now, it was like I was nothing to them. Worse than nothing. I was the obstacle standing between them and something they thought belonged to them. I tried reaching out for help. I called a lawyer, explained the situation, but he told me cases like this were complicated, messy, expensive. He warned me that without strong proof, it would be my word against theirs. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, like he didn't want to touch it. I hung up the phone feeling smaller than ever. Still, I didn't stop documenting. I wrote down everything, every note, every visit, every shadow. I even started taking photos. The broken shed lock, the footprints near the window, the shattered frame they had thrown on the floor. It became my secret armor, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, proof that I wasn't just a grieving widow inventing monsters in the dark. Then came the night I thought it would all end. It was past midnight, and the house was quiet. I was sitting in the living room again, the lamp casting a soft glow across the wire. Else, I had almost convinced myself I could sleep when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of the back door handle rattling. My blood turned cold. Someone was outside, trying to get in. I held my breath, straining to listen. The handle shook again, harder this time, followed by the faint creak of footsteps on the porch. My heart raced so fast it hurt. I grabbed the phone with shaking hands, ready to dial. But before I could, the sound stopped. Silence. Utter silence. I waited, frozen, staring at the door, expecting it to burst open at any second. But it never did. When I finally worked up the courage to peek outside, no one was there. The yard was empty, the street quiet. But I knew what had happened. They wanted me to hear. They wanted me to know they could reach me whenever they wanted. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the corner of the room with the lights off, clutching the phone in one hand and his shirt in the other, staring at the door until the first light of morning crept in. I felt trapped between two worlds. One where I was a grieving widow, just trying to survive, and another where I was the target of something far bigger, far darker than I could have ever imagined. By then, I wasn't just afraid of losing the house. I was afraid of losing myself. And yet, in the middle of that fear, something stronger began to take root. Anger, determination, call it survival instinct, call it desperation. But I realized I couldn't keep living like prey. If they wanted me gone, they would have to do more than scare me. They would have to destroy me completely. And I wasn't going to let that happen. From that night on, I wasn't just holding on. I was preparing for whatever came next. And deep down, I had a feeling. The worst was still ahead. The night it all came to a head still makes my chest tighten whenever I think about it. I had been living in a constant state of fear, but that evening, it crossed into something else entirely. Something I can only describe as war. The day had been strange from the start. I noticed a car parked dead on the street, one I hadn't seen before. It sat there for hours, engine off, windows dark, like it was waiting. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was just imagining things again. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't loosen. When the sun went down, the car was still there. By the time night fell, my whole body felt on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. I was right. It started with the sound of gravel crunching under heavy steps. Then came the pounding. Not at the door this time, but at the windows. Fists, hard and relentless, slamming against the glass. The house shook with every hit, the echoes filling the rooms. My heart raced, adrenaline coursing through me as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to breathe, trying to think. Then I heard the voices, his family. Their shouts cut through the night like knives. "Get out, Alic! Tonight's the night! This house isn't yours!" My chest burned as I listened, their anger spilling over into threats I can't forget. They said they'd drag me out if they had to. They said I'd regret ever thinking I could stay. I was frozen, torn between fear and fury. Every instinct told me to hide, to protect myself. But another voice inside me screamed louder. Enough! I picked up the phone, hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. My voice cracked as I begged for help, telling the operator there were people trying to break in. But even as I spoke, the door rattled under their force, the frame groaning as if it would split. And then it happened. The door flew open. They poured inside, faces twisted with rage, eyes locked on me like I was prey. I backed away, heart hammering, until my legs hit the couch and I couldn't move any farther. They shouted, pointing, their voices overlapping in a storm of hatred. One of them shoved over a lamp, the crash making me flinch. Another grabbed the edge of the tables. Ian hurled it aside. The house, the home I had built with my husband, was being torn apart in front of me. But what broke me wasn't the destruction. It was when one of them picked up another photo of me and my husband, ripped it from the frame, and crumpled it in their hand. That was the moment something inside me snapped, through my tears, through the shaking of my body. I found my voice. I screamed at them, words pouring out of me like fire. I told them this house was mine, that their son had built this life with me, that no amount of threats or cruelty could erase what we had. My voice cracked, my chest heaved, but I didn't stop. For the first time I saw them hesitate, just for a second. Their shouting faltered, their eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with something else. Realization that I wasn't going to break. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. They stared at me, their breaths harsh, their fists still clenched. And in that silence I felt it, a shift. The line had been crossed, the point of no return. Then, just as suddenly as they had come, they turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The sound of their car tires screeching against the pavement echoed into the night, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my living room, trembling but unbroken. I collapsed to the floor, sobs shaking through me, the fear, the anger, the pain. It all crashed over me in waves. But beneath it all, something stronger pulsed. Resolve. They had tried to destroy me. They had tried to erase me. But I was still here. That night changed everything. Because after the glass shattered, after the threats spilled into my living room, after I stood face to face with their hatred, I knew I could never go back to being silent. This wasn't just grief anymore. This wasn't just survival. This was a fight, and I wasn't backing down. When the house finally went quiet that night, I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, my body still trembling, my mind replaying everything again and again. The broken glass glittered under the faint glow of the streetlights. The torn pictures lay scattered across the floor, and the silence felt heavier than the shouting had. I should have felt relief that they were gone, but instead, I felt hollow, because I knew this wasn't over. They hadn't gotten what they wanted, and people like that, people fueled by anger, entitlement, and hate, they don't stop after one attempt. But as I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, another feeling slowly began to rise inside me. It was small at first, fragile, almost drowned out by the fear. But with every breath, it grew stronger. It was determination. For so long, I had been reacting, running, hiding, flinching at every sound. That night forced me to realize that if I kept living like that, I would lose myself. They had already taken my husband. I couldn't let them take me too. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I woke each morning to the mess they had left behind, reminders in every corner of what they had tried to do. At first, I couldn't even bring myself to clean it. I'd just sit there, staring, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. But then, little by little, I started picking up the pieces. I taped photos back together. I swept up the broken glass. I fixed what I could, even though nothing felt whole anymore. It was during those quiet hours of repairing the house that something else became clear to me. This wasn't just about my husband's family. This wasn't just about me losing a home or being pushed out of it. What happened to me was bigger than that, because my story wasn't the only one. I thought about the neighbors who had left before me. Families who packed their lives into boxes in the dead of night and never looked back. At the time, I thought it was coincidence. I thought life was just some pulling people in different directions. But now, I knew better. They hadn't left by choice. They had been pushed out, just like I almost was. It hit me like a wave. This wasn't just grief. This was injustice, and it had been happening right in front of me for years. The weight of that realization was crushing, but it was also clarifying. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you know, you can't go back to pretending you don't. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I wasn't going to be another name, another face, another story buried under the weight of someone else's hate. I started keeping records, photos, notes, details of what had happened. I reached out to neighbors who had stories of their own, people who had been forced to leave because of the same intimidation and cruelty. I listened, I wrote, I collected every piece of evidence I could. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was terrifying. Every time I left my house, I felt eyes on me. Every time a car slowed near the curb, my heart pounded like it did that night. But this time, I didn't hide. I stood a little taller. I held my head a little higher, because the truth was on my side. And if my husband's family thought they could erase me, erase us, by breaking windows and tearing photos, they were wrong. The scars they left behind became my fuel. The silence they wanted became my voice. I don't tell this story for pity. I don't share it because I want sympathy. I share it because it's real, because it happened to me. because it happens to so many others whose voices are never heard. And maybe you've seen it too. Maybe in your neighborhood, or in your own family, or in the quiet whispers you try to ignore. So I'll ask you the same question I ask myself every single night. How many more stories like mine will it take before people finally say enough? Because one thing is certain, silence only protects the ones causing the pain. And as long as they think no one will speak, they'll keep doing it. I survived that night, rebuilt. I found my voice. But the truth is, this isn't just my fight. It belongs to all of us. And the question that lingers, heavy and unshakable, is this: what will you do when it's your turn to stand?